In the coastal town of Millbrook, a 64-year-old widow was about to face the dissolution of her family legacy. What started as a traditional Easter celebration took a shocking turn when they came face to face with a truth that had been quietly consuming their livelihood. Margaret Henderson wasn't your typical small-town baker. For 3 generations, she had spent her life preserving her husband's dream, known for maintaining perfection despite mounting financial pressures that threatened to crumble everything. When they encountered Eliza's unexpected announcement during dessert, they had no idea they were walking into a crisis that would force them to redefine what legacy truly means. Margaret responded with a mixture of relief and despair that would lead to exposing decades of family tension and buried secrets. What began as the potential end of Henderson's bakery would become a catalyst for healing and transformation. The divided town of Millbrook would never be the same after discovering that preservation sometimes requires the courage to change rather than simply endure. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches, you make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook's cobblestone streets as church bells echoed through the coastal air. Margaret Henderson stood in her kitchen, hands working from muscle memory as she glazed the traditional Easter ham. 64. Years had etched fine lines around her eyes, but her movements remained precise, efficient, qualities that had built Henderson's bakery into what locals called the soul of Millbrook. "Need any help, Mom?" Sarah appeared in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. At 39, she'd become her mother's shadow at the bakery, postponing dreams of culinary school to keep the family business running. After her father's death, "Everything's under control," Margaret answered, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She'd been practicing this expression for months now, the confident matriarch hiding financial statements in locked drawers and screening calls from the bank. The morning passed in familiar rhythms. Church service at St. Bartholomew's, where the Hendersons had occupied the same third-row pew for 3 generations. Easter egg hunt in Margaret's garden, where neighborhood children scattered across the lawn like confetti. Then the elaborate family dinner that Margaret had prepared despite the weight pressing against her chest. Tradition demanded perfection. Robert would have wanted it that way. James arrived with Eliza just before noon. At 42, Margaret's eldest had the polished look of someone whose life happened in boardrooms, not bakeries. Boston had claimed him 15 years ago, and Millbrook had become a place he visited rather than inhabited. Eliza stood beside him, elegant in a simple spring dress, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the familiar chaos of the Henderson home. "Place hasn't changed a bit," James commented, kissing his mother's cheek. "Still smells like heaven." "Some things are worth preserving," Margaret replied, the words catching slightly in her throat. It was Michael who spotted their unexpected guest first. The youngest Henderson stood by the window, his historian's eye cataloging the scene. The Easter decorations Margaret had maintained since their childhood, the faces of neighbors who came for the egg hunt, the subtle shift in his mother's posture. When the vintage Cadillac pulled into the driveway, "Uncle Daniel's here," Michael announced, his quiet voice somehow cutting through the household noise. Margaret's hands stilled on the table setting. "He called yesterday, said he wanted to reconnect." Sarah exchanged a glance with James. Their father's brother hadn't attended a family gathering since the funeral. The estrangement dated back further, something about inheritance and betrayal that the siblings had never fully understood. Daniel. Porter arrived with an armful of lilies and the easy charm that had always been his trademark. At 67, he remained handsome, his silver hair and tailored clothes projecting success. "Margaret, you look radiant as ever," he said, embracing his sister-in-law with familiar ease. "It's been a long time, Daniel," she replied, her voice neutral. Dinner progressed with surface pleasantries stretched tight across unspoken tensions. Margaret served her famous hot cross buns, Sarah described the bakery's Easter specials, and Michael shared anecdotes from his high school history class. James spoke of Boston with measured enthusiasm, while Eliza remained unusually quiet, her lawyer's eyes observing the family dynamics. "So," Daniel said during a lull, swirling his wine, "Millbrook's changing? I heard Westview Street is getting that new shopping complex." "Progress marches on," Margaret replied, her smile fixed. "Speaking of change," Eliza said suddenly, placing her dessert fork beside her untouched lemon cake, "I think it's time we address what's happening." James looked at his wife with confusion. "Eliza, I apologize for doing this now," she continued, her direct gaze finding Margaret. "But secrets don't serve anyone. This is the last holiday with the Henderson name." The silence that followed felt physical, like pressure building before a storm. "What are you talking about?" Sarah demanded, fingers gripping her napkin. "The bakery," Eliza said. "It's being sold to Reed Development. They're planning to demolish it for luxury condominiums." Margaret's face drained of color. "How did you—" "I'm an environmental lawyer, Margaret. Oliver Reed's company has been under investigation before. When James mentioned you were meeting with developers, I looked into it." Sarah turned to her mother, betrayal flashing in her eyes. "You're selling the bakery? Without telling us?" "I was going to tell you after Easter," Margaret said, her composure finally cracking. "I didn't want to ruin the holiday." "Instead, your daughter-in-law did that for you," Daniel commented dryly. "Ruin the holiday?" Sarah's voice rose. "That building has been in our family for 3 generations. Dad built that place with his hands." "Your father would understand," Margaret said, her fingers trembling against the tablecloth. "The economy isn't what it was. Costs keep rising, and you didn't think to ask for help?" Sarah stood abruptly. "I've been working there every day for 15 years, putting my life on hold, and you make this decision without me." "Sarah, please." Margaret reached for her daughter's hand. "No." Sarah stepped back, tears welling. "I can't believe you would do this, or that James's wife knew before I did." She cast an accusing glance at Eliza before storming out, the front door slamming behind her. Michael sat motionless, his historian's mind already cataloging the moment, the last Easter at the Henderson home as they knew it. James looked torn between following his sister and staying with his mother. "You had no right," he told Eliza quietly. "Your mother had no right to hide this," Eliza replied, unwavering. "The community deserves to know before it's too late. That building is part of Millbrook's heritage." "It's my building," Margaret said, finding her voice again. "My decision. Robert left it to me." Daniel cleared his throat. "Margaret's being practical. The offer from Reed is generous, more than fair in today's market." "You knew about this?" James asked, studying his uncle with newfound suspicion. "I may have helped facilitate the introduction," Daniel admitted. "I have connections in real estate." "Of course you do," James muttered. Eliza stood, gathering her purse. "I should check on Sarah." "Haven't you done enough?" James said, surprising himself with his defensiveness. "Someone needed to speak the truth," she replied. "I respect your mother, James, but this affects more than just her. It affects your sister's career, your brother's community, this town's history." "It's not your decision to make." James's voice rose uncharacteristically. "No, it's mine," Margaret interjected firmly. "And it's made." After Eliza left, Michael finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Dad would have wanted us to know." "Your father would have wanted me to survive," Margaret replied, the admission hanging in the air like a confession. "I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. But I'm not sorry for making a decision I should have made years ago." Neighbors could still hear the arguments from the garden as they collected their children and Easter baskets. By sunset, the house had emptied. Daniel departed with vague promises of being in touch. Michael retreated to his apartment above the garage, and Eliza waited in the car while James lingered in the kitchen with his mother. "You should have told me," he said, helping her wrap leftovers she wouldn't eat. "You have your own life, James," Margaret replied, her hands showing their age as she methodically cleaned her kitchen. "Your own problems." "The bakery isn't just a business, Mom. It's our history." Margaret paused, looking at her son with eyes that suddenly seemed decades older than her age. "History doesn't pay mortgages, James, or suppliers, or property taxes that keep rising while our sales keep falling." James studied his mother's face, seeing behind her practiced strength for the first time in years. "How bad is it?" Margaret's shoulders sagged slightly as she closed the refrigerator door. "Bad enough that I've been using my retirement savings to keep the doors open. Bad enough that I can't do it anymore." Outside, the coastal fog began rolling in from the Atlantic, wrapping around the Henderson home like a shroud, obscuring the boundaries between land and sea, past and future, endings and beginnings. James stared at the stack of ledgers on the bakery's office desk, his fingers tracing the columns of red figures that had multiplied with each passing year. The small room smelled of vanilla and old paper, a combination that transported him back to childhood afternoons spent doing homework while his father calculated the day's sales. He'd extended his stay in Millbrook by a week, calling his firm with vague explanations about family matters. Outside the frosted glass window, he could hear Sarah's voice, artificially bright as she pitched new seasonal specials to customers. "Try our lavender honey scones. They're 20% off this week." Her sales pitch carried a desperate edge that made James wince. The financial reality was worse than he'd imagined. Since Robert's death, the bakery had hemorrhaged money, first slowly, then rapidly as costs increased and customer traffic declined. The waterfront location that had once been Henderson's greatest asset had become its liability, with property taxes tripling in the past decade. Margaret had been methodical in her record-keeping and equally methodical in her desperation, transferring personal funds into the business account in neat, increasingly frequent installments. His mother's handwriting grew shakier in the most recent entries. "Find what you're looking for?" James looked up to find Margaret standing in the doorway, flour dusting her apron. Her expression was carefully neutral, but he recognized the tension in her shoulders, the same posture she'd maintained through his father's funeral. "I found the truth," he replied quietly. "You should have told me years ago." "And what would you have done? Left your career in Boston?" She entered the office, closing the door behind her. "That was never the plan for you, James. That wasn't your decision to make alone. It was Robert's wish that you follow your own path." She touched the ledgers with familiar reverence. "He was so proud of you. He would have wanted me to help when things got bad." Robert wasn't always practical about this place. Her voice had an edge James rarely heard. He loved it more than it loved him back. Across town in the Millbrook Historical Society archives, Michael flipped through property records dating back to 1923. The history teacher in him had awakened with fierce purpose after Easter dinner. If he couldn't save the bakery through sentiment, perhaps he could save it through historical significance. The original building was a bootlegger's distribution point during Prohibition, he muttered to himself, snapping photos of architectural drawings with his phone. The coastal location had made it perfect for runners bringing Canadian whiskey into Massachusetts. The Henderson family had purchased it in 1933, converting it to a bakery after repeal. "That's quite the collection you've amassed," said an elderly voice. Michael looked up to find Arthur Wells, the town's unofficial historian, peering over his shoulder. "The Henderson building," Michael explained. "Mom's selling it to developers. I'm trying to find a reason they can't tear it down." Arthur's bushy eyebrows rose. "Your mother's selling? That can't be right." "It is. Reed Development is buying it for condominiums." Arthur frowned, adjusting his glasses. That building survived the hurricane of '38. The basement still has the original stone foundation, and your grandfather's. Modifications to the facade in '51 are textbook post-war coastal architecture. Michael felt a surge of hope. Would that qualify it for historical protection? It might, Arthur said, lowering himself into a chair. But you'll need more than just architectural significance. You need a compelling narrative about its role in the community's development. Michael nodded, a new determination settling over him. I think I know where to start. Eliza sat across from Maya Chen at Millbrook's only coffee shop, watching the town council member carefully consider her words. Oliver Reed's company has a troubling pattern, Eliza said, sliding a folder across the table. 3 environmental citations in New Hampshire last year, groundwater contamination at their Rhode Island project, and they've requested 5 different variance exemptions for the Henderson property already. Maya took the folder, her expression professional but guarded. At 40, she balanced her role on the council with running her family's hardware store. She'd known Sarah since kindergarten. The council is aware of Reed's record, Maya admitted. But the development would bring significant tax revenue. And the truth is, Millbrook needs the housing. Luxury condos that locals can't afford? Mixed development. Some luxury, some middle market. Maya sighed. Eliza, I understand your concerns. I practically grew up in Henderson's bakery. But the town's changing. We've lost 3 businesses on Main Street in 2 years. So we sacrifice more local businesses to save the rest. We adapt, Maya replied, closing the folder. Like every small town has to. The council sees Reed's project as progress. Eliza started to respond when her phone buzzed. A text from a colleague. A photo of Daniel Porter having lunch with Oliver Reed at an upscale restaurant in the neighboring town of Essex. Her mouth tightened. What is it? Maya asked. Just more evidence that this deal isn't what it seems. The bakery closed early that Wednesday, but lights still burned behind the storefront windows as the Henderson family gathered among the display cases and wooden tables. Sarah paced between the counters while Michael spread old photographs and documents across a table dusted with flour. Margaret sat heavily in a chair, looking smaller than James remembered. You've been using your retirement money? Sarah's voice cracked as she finally processed what James had discovered. Margaret nodded. It was temporary at first, just to cover slow months. Then it became necessary. For how long? Michael asked. 2 years, Margaret admitted. Since the property tax reassessment, that's nearly $100,000, James said, the figures from the ledgers still fresh in his mind. I couldn't let it fail on my watch, Margaret whispered. After everything your father put into it. So instead you'll let strangers destroy it, Sarah interrupted. That's not fair, James said, surprised by his continued defense of their mother. None of this is fair. Sarah's voice rose as she turned on her brother. You got to leave, to have the life you wanted, while I stayed and worked 60-hour weeks believing we were building something that would last. I never asked you to stay, Margaret said quietly. The silence that followed felt devastating. What? Sarah finally managed. I never asked either of you to carry this burden, Margaret continued, her composure finally breaking. Your father did. He created this. This expectation that Hendersons would always be here. But bakeries close, buildings change hands. It's the natural order of things. Not like this, Michael said, pushing forward a photograph of their grandfather standing proudly in front of the newly renovated storefront in 1951. This building has historical significance. It could qualify for protected status. Margaret looked up sharply. What are you saying? I'm saying we could block the sale if the building becomes a historical landmark. The bakery door chimed unexpectedly. Eliza entered, her expression grim as she joined them at the table. "Before we discuss anything else," she said, pulling out her phone, "you should know that Daniel has been working with Reed for months. He stands to make a substantial commission on this sale." She showed them the photo of Daniel and Reed at lunch. "That snake," Sarah muttered. "Where did you get this?" James asked his wife. "I have colleagues watching Reed. His company has a history of finding distressed properties and manipulating the sellers." Margaret's face had gone pale. "Daniel approached me about selling 6 months ago. He said it was the sensible thing to do before the property lost more value. He created the crisis and then offered the solution," Eliza said. "It's a common tactic." James saw his mother's hands trembling and felt a surge of protective anger. The business consultant in him recognized the predatory strategy. The son, in him, wanted justice. "I thought I was doing what was best," Margaret said, tears finally breaking through her careful composure. "I'm so tired of fighting to keep these doors open alone." "You're not alone," Michael said firmly, covering her hand with his. "Not anymore." James exchanged a glance with Eliza, recognizing the shift in her expression, her righteous, environmental concerns softening with empathy for the family she'd married into. "What are our options?" James asked, turning to Michael. "I petition for historical status for the building while we look at restructuring the business," Michael replied, straightening his glasses. "It won't be easy, but it might buy us time." "Reed won't take that lying down," Eliza warned, "and neither will Daniel." "Let them come," Sarah said, her earlier anger transforming into determination. "This isn't just about us anymore." As night settled over Millbrook, the Henderson family remained gathered in the warm light of the bakery, surrounded by the ghosts of past generations and the uncertain promise of the future. For the first time in years, Margaret allowed herself to share the weight she'd carried alone for so long. "We'll explore all options before anything's final," James said as they prepared to leave. "Together. And while we do," Michael added, gathering his research, "I'm going to file for historical landmark status first thing tomorrow." "Reed won't like that," Margaret cautioned. "Good," Sarah replied, locking the bakery door behind them. "It's about time someone fought back." Outside, a car slowed as it passed the bakery, a sleek black sedan with Oliver Reed at the wheel, his gaze fixed on the Henderson family as they stood united beneath the vintage sign their grandfather had hung. 70 years earlier. "Just sign here if you support preserving Henderson's bakery as a historical landmark." Michael Henderson stood outside the post office, clipboard in hand, his usually quiet demeanor transformed by unexpected purpose. A small crowd had gathered around his table of historical photographs showing the bakery through the decades, from its Prohibition-era origins to the present day. The petition had already collected over 200 signatures, surprising even Michael with the depth of community support. "That building survived the hurricane of '38 when half the waterfront washed away," Arthur Wells told an onlooker, pointing to a black-and-white photograph. The elderly historian had become Michael's most vocal ally. "The Henderson family rebuilt it brick by brick. Show me that kind of craftsmanship in today's construction." Across the street, a glossy banner stretched across the vacant storefront that had once housed Millbrook Pharmacy. "Reed Development presents the Millbrook Harbor View, Luxury Waterfront Living." Behind the large windows, Oliver Reed personally guided small groups through a sophisticated model display of the proposed condominiums. The town had divided within days. "The firm can't hold your position indefinitely, James. Anderson is already handling your accounts." The voice of James's supervisor crackled through his phone as he sat in Henderson's bakery, spreadsheets spread before him. "We need a timeline for your return." James watched Sarah through the office window as she served customers with determined cheer. 3 generations of family recipes being executed with precision. He'd spent the past week rebuilding the bakery's financial model, looking for a path to sustainability. "I need another 2 weeks," he said, surprising himself. Family situation is complicated. The pause on the other end spoke volumes. This isn't like you, Henderson. You've never put family before business before. The remark stung with its accuracy. Things change, James replied. I'll call you next week with an update. He ended the call and returned to the spreadsheets. The numbers remained stubbornly grim, but something deeper than professional analysis kept him working. Each morning spent in the warm kitchen, watching his mother and sister work with practiced synchronicity, awakened memories of childhood, of belonging to something irreplaceable. You can't avoid me forever, Sarah. Maya Chen stood in the bakery's doorway after closing, her council member composure faltering in the face of her oldest friend's cold silence. We need to talk about this. Sarah continued wiping down counters, her movements sharp with anger. I think the council has made its position clear. This isn't personal. My family business being demolished isn't personal. Sarah finally looked up, her voice tight. The place where we had every birthday party growing up? The town is dying, Sarah, Maya said quietly, stepping inside. 3 businesses closed last year. Young families are moving away because there's no housing they can afford. The tax base is shrinking. So luxury condos for wealthy Boston commuters will save us? 15% of the units will be moderate income. Reed amended the proposal after our last meeting. Maya pulled out a folder. The development would create 30 permanent jobs and boost the town's annual tax revenue by 20%. Sarah stopped cleaning, her professional instincts engaging despite her anger. What kind of jobs? Maintenance, security, administrative, plus construction jobs during the build. Maya hesitated. And there's a commercial space on the ground floor. Reed suggested it could house a small cafe. He mentioned keeping the Hendersons' name as a gesture. Sarah felt her throat tighten. You think we'd settle for a corporate cafe using our family recipes? I think we're trying to find middle ground. Maya's voice hardened. Which is more than you're doing right now. Middle ground isn't demolishing a century of history. History doesn't keep towns alive, Sarah. People and jobs do. Maya placed the folder on the counter. Read the proposal, then tell me what matters more. Preserving one building or saving Millbrook's future. The town hall meeting had been called on short notice, but the historic meeting room overflowed with residents. The preservation faction, mostly older citizens and families with deep Millbrook roots, filled the left side of the room. The pro-development group, younger families, business owners and construction workers hoping for jobs, occupied the right. The divide was visible, physical, and tense. Margaret sat with her family in the front row, uncomfortably aware of the community's eyes upon her. Michael fidgeted with his notes for his presentation on the bakery's historical significance. James sat stiffly in a suit that reminded Margaret how far he'd traveled from Millbrook. Sarah glared across the aisle at Maya, who sat with the town council. Mayor Jenkins called the meeting to order. Tonight, we're discussing the proposed redevelopment of the Hendersons' bakery property and the counter-petition to grant it historical landmark status. We'll hear presentations from both sides, followed by community comments. Oliver Reed approached the podium first, his confidence filling the room. At 45, he carried himself with the polished assurance of someone accustomed to convincing others. His presentation was sleek and professional. Architectural renderings of a gleaming 4-story building with a public boardwalk along the waterfront, statistics on job creation, and tax revenue projections that made several council members nod appreciatively. This isn't just about housing, Reed concluded, his voice resonating through the room. It's about Millbrook's future. I've built my career creating developments that honor a community's character while bringing it into the modern era. He looked directly at the Henderson family. Change is inevitable. The question is whether we direct that change or let it happen to us. To Margaret's surprise, Daniel stood to join Reed at the podium, his familiar face drawing murmurs from longtime residents who remembered his falling out with Robert. "I grew up in this town," Daniel began, his voice warm with practiced sincerity. "My brother Robert believed in progress. The bakery was revolutionary in its time, the first in town to have commercial refrigeration, to ship products to other cities. Robert understood that sometimes we preserve the spirit of something by allowing its form to evolve." Margaret felt her hands tighten into fists. Robert had never spoken those words. Daniel was rewriting her husband's legacy to serve his own interests. Michael was called next, his lanky frame unfolding as he approached the podium with his collection of historical documents. "Henderson's bakery isn't just a building," he began, his historian's passion overcoming his natural reticence. "It's the last intact example of post-prohibition commercial architecture on our waterfront. Its foundation stones were laid by indigenous workers before the town was incorporated." Margaret watched with quiet amazement as her youngest son, always overshadowed by his siblings, commanded the room's attention, pointing out architectural details and historical connections that even she hadn't known. For the first time, the conflict transcended her family's private crisis, expanding into a community reckoning with its identity. The public comment period grew heated. Construction workers spoke of needing jobs that would keep them in town. Elderly residents recalled the Henderson family providing free bread during difficult times. Young parents described the impossibility of finding affordable housing. Business owners worried about declining foot traffic. "My grandfather came home from World War II and rebuilt that storefront with his own hands," Sarah said when her turn came. "The bakery has fed this community through hurricanes, blizzards, and recessions. Are we really willing to replace that legacy with vacation homes for people who will visit 2 weekends a year?" The meeting stretched past 11 o'clock, with neither side yielding ground. Mayor Jenkins finally called for a council vote on whether to delay any decisions pending a historical review committee's assessment of the building's landmark eligibility. The vote split 3-2 in favor of the review, with Maya casting the deciding vote after a long moment of hesitation. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise across the room, meeting her friend's gaze as something shifted between them. As the crowd dispersed, into the cool spring night, James found himself standing beside his mother, watching the town's factions separate like oil and water. "I've torn the town apart," Margaret murmured, her face lined with exhaustion. "The town was already dividing," James replied. "This just made the fractures visible." Across the square, Eliza approached Oliver Reed as he packed up his presentation materials. Her expression was determined as she addressed him directly. "I'd like to discuss your environmental impact assessments," she said. "In private." Reed studied her for a moment before nodding. "Tomorrow morning. My office at the Model Center. 8 o'clock. Neither noticed Daniel watching their exchange from the shadows, his calculated smile fading as he realized the Henderson family might prove more resilient than he'd anticipated. The Model Center for Reed Development had that particular smell of new construction: paint, carpet adhesive, and ambition. Eliza arrived precisely at 8, legal portfolio in hand, environmental lawyer mode fully engaged. She found Oliver Reed studying architectural drawings, sleeves rolled up in a way that contradicted her mental image of the detached developer. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, looking up. "Coffee?" "I prefer Eliza, and yes, black." Oliver poured from a carafe and handed her a mug emblazoned with his company logo. "I suspect this isn't a social call." "Your environmental impact assessment has significant gaps," Eliza said, opening her portfolio. "The soil testing doesn't account for possible contamination from the building's Prohibition-era use, and your stormwater management plan is inadequate for a coastal property that will experience increasing storm surges due to climate change." Oliver didn't immediately defend himself as she'd expected. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "You've done your homework. It's my job." No, your job is environmental law for Boston Medical. This is personal. He gestured to chairs by the window overlooking the harbor. The question is why? Eliza hesitated before sitting. My husband's family has history here. So do I. Oliver's voice softened unexpectedly. He reached for a framed photograph on his desk and handed it to her. A small boy stood outside Henderson's bakery, clutching a paper bag, grinning with a missing front tooth. That's you, Eliza said, surprised. Summer of '85. My grandmother would take me there every Saturday. He paused, something vulnerable, crossing his expression. We lived in Riverdale, the low-income housing that used to be on the north side. She cleaned houses for wealthy families in Millbrook, including the Porters. Daniel Porter? Eliza's attention sharpened. And his brother Robert. My grandmother would pick up her paycheck, then take me to Henderson's for a chocolate eclair. His smile held genuine warmth. Robert always gave me an extra cookie, said I was too skinny. Eliza studied him with new eyes. You never mentioned this connection. Would it have mattered? Oliver asked. In my experience, developers aren't supposed to have personal attachments. We're just faceless capitalists destroying communities. The bitterness in his tone caught her off guard. Then why this project? Why this building? Oliver looked out at the harbor before answering. Because Millbrook needs to evolve or die, and because I wanted to come home. His gaze returned to her. Now, about those environmental concerns, you're right. Let's address them properly. The morning rush at Henderson's bakery always peaked at 7:30. Sarah worked the front counter while Margaret handled the baking, their choreographed efficiency born of years working side by side. What neither expected was James arriving at 5 a.m., rolling up his sleeves and asking, "Where do you need me?" Now he stood beside Sarah, serving customers with growing confidence, his corporate polish giving way to genuine warmth as he reconnected with regulars he'd known since childhood. James Henderson, marveled Mrs. Abernathy, Millbrook Elementary's retired principal. Never thought I'd see you behind this counter again. Neither did I, he admitted, passing her the sourdough loaf she'd ordered weekly for 30 years. During a lull, Sarah found herself watching her brother, the crisp precision of his movements, the way he positioned each pastry just so. Their father's influence. You still remember, she said quietly. James looked up, flour dusting his Harvard Business School t-shirt. Some things you don't forget. You never seemed to care about the bakery, Sarah said, the accusation gentler than it would have been weeks ago. I cared. I just couldn't see myself here forever. He arranged croissants in the display case. But that doesn't mean I didn't. Value what Dad built, what you maintained. Something tight in Sarah's chest began to loosen. You're not bad at this for a corporate sellout. James laughed, the sound bridging years of distance. And you're not bad at business, for an artist who never left home. I'm not an artist, she protested. Those pastry designs say otherwise. He nodded toward her signature creations, intricate, seasonal tarts that customers photographed as often as they ate. You've brought your own vision here, Sarah. It's not just Dad's bakery anymore. Margaret hadn't intended to search Robert's things. She'd simply been clearing space in the attic for Michael's growing collection of historical materials when she found the box of leather-bound journals. Robert had kept them faithfully, recording everything from weather patterns to business decisions. Now she sat on her bed, reading entries from the final years of his life. March 15th, 2020, discussed selling the bakery with Margaret. Again, she won't hear of it. I understand her attachment, but the business is changing. Industrial bakeries undercut our prices. Young families want convenience more than tradition. Perhaps it's time to let go while we can still do so on our terms. July 8th, 2021. Daniel suggested a developer friend who might be interested in the property. The land value now exceeds the business value. Margaret would be heartbroken, but she deserves a retirement where she's not worrying about payroll every week. I'll bring it up after the holidays. October 30th, 2021. Chest pains again today. Didn't tell Margaret. We'll make doctor's appointment next week after the Halloween rush. The last entry was dated November 2nd, 2021. Robert had died in his sleep 3 days later. Margaret closed the journal, her hands trembling. Robert had been considering selling, had recognized the changing reality even as she'd fought to preserve his legacy at all costs. The irony was almost too much to bear. You manipulated me. Margaret stood in Daniel's condo overlooking the harbor, her voice steady despite her anger. You knew what Robert wanted, but you twisted it for your benefit. Daniel poured himself a scotch without offering her one. I presented you with an opportunity. That's hardly manipulation. You get a commission if I sell to Reed. How much? His hesitation told her everything. 10%. Nearly $100,000. Margaret shook her head. Was that worth betraying your brother's memory? Daniel's carefully maintained facade cracked. Robert betrayed me first. That bakery should have been half mine. Our parents intended us to run it together. His voice rose. But your husband pushed me out over a business disagreement, then acted like the wounded party when I started my own venture. That disagreement was you embezzling funds, Margaret countered. Robert covered your debt to keep you out of jail. He held that over me for 20 years. Daniel's composure shattered completely, and left me nothing in his will, not even a mention. So yes, when Reed contacted me looking for properties, I thought of the bakery. Call it karmic balance. Margaret studied her brother-in-law, seeing beneath his expensive clothes and practiced charm to the desperate man beneath. You're broke, aren't you? Daniel's bitter laugh confirmed it. Spectacularly. The pandemic killed my investment portfolio. This commission is my last hope to avoid bankruptcy. A flash of genuine grief crossed his face. Robert would have helped me once upon a time, before you turned him against me. The Henderson dining room hadn't hosted a family dinner since Easter, but now 6 place settings adorned the table. Michael had arranged his newest historical finds as a centerpiece, faded, photographs of the bakery through the decades. One in particular had captured everyone's attention, a 1950s image showing a woman and young boy being served by Robert Henderson Sr. That's my grandmother, Oliver Reed said quietly, examining the photograph. And my father. Michael nodded, eyes bright with discovery. I found it in the town archives. Your grandmother worked for the Porter family for nearly 30 years. Margaret watched Oliver's expression soften as he studied the image. She'd surprised everyone, herself included, by inviting him to dinner. But Robert's journals had shifted, something fundamental in her understanding of the situation. The dinner began awkwardly. James and Sarah maintained a guarded politeness, while Eliza observed with a lawyer's analytical eye. But as the meal progressed, the conversation gradually warmed, particularly when Oliver shared memories of visiting the bakery as a child. The smell of that place was magic, he said, his corporate persona falling away. My grandmother would save all week for those Saturday visits. Why didn't you tell us about this connection before? Sarah asked, suspicion still edging her voice. Would you have seen me differently? Oliver challenged. Or would I still just be the developer destroying your family legacy? An uncomfortable silence fell until Margaret spoke. I found Robert's journals, she said, drawing everyone's attention. He was considering selling the bakery before he died. He saw the changes coming, the challenges we're facing now. Dad wanted to sell? Sarah's disbelief was palpable. He wanted us to have choices, Margaret clarified. To not be imprisoned by the past. Oliver leaned forward, sensing an opening. I have a revised proposal, he said. one that might bridge what seems unbridgeable. He pulled out a folder of drawings. A development that preserves the original bakery building as its centerpiece, incorporating it into a mixed-use property that honors its history while creating new opportunities. The concept drawings showed Henderson's historic facade preserved, with a modern structure rising behind and beside it rather than replacing it. The bakery space remained intact, but opened onto a public courtyard. The original building becomes the heart of the development, not its casualty, Oliver explained. Michael studied the drawings with surprise. You'd preserve the historical elements? The entire original structure, Oliver confirmed. It's more expensive to build this way, but he hesitated. Some things are worth preserving. Margaret recognized Robert's phrase from their private conversations and felt a complicated emotion rise in her chest, grief tangled with possibility. You should see some of my other projects. Oliver continued cautiously. I've done similar adaptive reuse developments in Portsmouth and Newport. An uncomfortable silence stretched until Sarah finally spoke. I'd need to see them before considering anything like this. We both would, Michael added. I can arrange a tour next week, Oliver said, relief evident in his voice. See for yourselves what's possible when old and new coexist thoughtfully. As the evening ended, the battle lines that had seemed so clearly drawn began to blur. Nothing was resolved, but something had shifted. Assumptions challenged, connections revealed, possibilities opened where there had seemed only endings. This was the Harborside Cannery built in 1898, Oliver explained as he guided Sarah and Michael through a renovated brick building in Portsmouth. It was scheduled for demolition when we acquired it. Sarah ran her hand along the original exposed brick wall, now complemented by steel beams and modern lighting. The former industrial space had been transformed into a vibrant food hall with small vendor stalls surrounding a central dining area. Historic black and white photographs lined the walls, telling the story of the building's past. We preserved the exterior completely, Oliver continued, gesturing to the tall windows that flooded the space with natural light. The original smokestack is now a feature element in the courtyard garden. Sarah watched as lunchtime customers moved through the space, young professionals, families, tourists, all enjoying the atmosphere as much as the food. Unlike the sterile, upscale developments she had imagined, this place felt authentic, alive with energy. The vendors are all local businesses, Oliver added, noticing her interest. Most couldn't afford standalone retail spaces, but this shared model makes it viable. The cannery's history became part of their brand story. Michael studied the historical displays with professional appreciation. You've done more than just preserve the structure. You've kept its narrative alive. That's the point, Oliver said, leading them to a quiet corner table where architectural drawings awaited. Buildings without stories are just shells. The Henderson Bakery has one of the richest stories in Millbrook. He unrolled plans showing a transformed version of their family bakery. The historic facade remained intact, but the interior opened into a modern space with multiple food vendors and a central Henderson's counter as the anchor. The original baking kitchen would be visible through glass walls, Oliver explained, his enthusiasm genuine. Customers could watch traditional methods alongside contemporary offerings. Sarah had arrived skeptical, arms crossed and responses clipped. But as Oliver walked them through two more successful renovations, a textile mill converted to artists' lofts and a historic hotel restored to its original glory while modernized inside, her resistance began to soften. I always imagined developers just wanting to tear everything down, she admitted as they drove back to Millbrook. Some do, Oliver replied. It's cheaper, faster, but it's also short-sighted. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Communities need continuity to thrive. The past and future in conversation, not competition. Michael leaned forward from the back seat. Like your grandmother and father at Henderson's. Oliver nodded, his typical confidence momentarily replaced by something more vulnerable. This project matters to me beyond business reasons. It's personal. Sarah watched the coastline roll by, her concept of what might be possible expanding with each mile. James sat in the bakery office long after closing, spreadsheets and market research scattered across the desk. The past week had transformed his extended leave into something approaching permanence, his Boston life receding in importance with each passing day. His laptop showed the mock-up of a redesigned Henderson's Bakery website, featuring online ordering and nationwide shipping options. Next to it lay a business plan for expanding their most popular items into wholesale markets while maintaining the bakery as a community hub. "Still working?" Margaret asked, bringing him a cup of coffee. James rubbed his eyes. "Just finalizing some projections." He turned the screen toward her. "The bakery could have a future beyond the physical building. Mom, our recipes, our heritage, they can reach people far beyond Millbrook." Margaret studied the proposal, her expression thoughtful. "You sound like you're planning to stay." "I'm considering it." The admission surprised James as he said it, yet felt right. Boston has plenty of management consultants, but there's only one Henderson's Bakery. Margaret touched his shoulder gently. "Whatever happens with the building, I'm glad you've found your way back." The corner table at Millbrook Cafe had become an unlikely meeting ground for Eliza and Maya. Their initial tension had evolved into a focused partnership as they combed through grant applications and preservation funding opportunities. "The Massachusetts Historical Commission has a matching grant program," Maya said, highlighting text on her tablet. "And this federal tax credit for rehabilitating historic structures could offset development costs." Eliza nodded, making notes. If the building gets landmark status, these could make Oliver's preservation plan financially viable. She hesitated before adding, "Thank you for the council vote. I know it wasn't easy." Maya's expression softened. "Sarah and I have been friends since we were 5, but I also have a responsibility to the town's future." She sighed. "The compromise approach might work for everyone, if we can navigate the politics." "And if Oliver's sincere," Eliza added. "You think he's not?" "I think." Eliza considered her words carefully. "I think he's more sincere than I initially believed, but his business still comes first. Sometimes good business and good community outcomes align," Maya pointed out. "If we structure this right, everyone wins." Daniel paced Margaret's living room, his earlier charm replaced by barely concealed panic. "You're making a mistake listening to Reed's preservation fantasy. The original offer is cleaner, more profitable." Margaret remained calm, Robert's journals providing an emotional anchor she hadn't possessed during Daniel's previous appeals. "The revised proposal preserves the building while still allowing for development. It seems like a reasonable compromise." "Compromises cost money. Reed will reduce his offer substantially if he has to work around the existing structure." "Perhaps, but legacy matters too." Daniel's facade cracked. "Margaret, I need this deal to close. The original deal. I have debts, significant ones." "That's not my concern, Daniel." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "It should be." His voice rose sharply. "I'm family. Robert would have helped me." "Robert helped you many times," Margaret replied evenly. "And you're using his memory to manipulate me. That ends now." Daniel's expression hardened. "You'll regret this decision. I guarantee it." The young woman examining the bakery display case didn't look particularly noteworthy, just another customer in her early 30s with a casual style and an interest in Henderson's cherry turnovers. It was Michael who recognized her first. "You're Lily Chen," he said, dropping the tray of sourdough loaves he'd been carrying to the front. "From Found Foods." The woman smiled, her unpretentious manner belying her 2 million YouTube subscribers and recent Netflix documentary series. "I was hoping to be incognito a bit longer." Sarah emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her apron. "The Lily Chen? In our bakery?" "In my hometown bakery," Lily corrected her. "I grew up 3 blocks from here. Henderson's catered my high school graduation." Within minutes, the family gathered around a corner table as Lily explained her presence. "I'm developing a series on generational family food businesses at risk of disappearing. When I heard about Henderson's situation, I knew it had to be featured." "How did you hear about us?" Sarah asked. "Your preservation petition went semi-viral in certain corners of the internet," Lily explained. "Historic buildings, traditional baking methods. These things resonate with people tired of corporate homogenization." James leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A short documentary feature. The history, the current challenges, the possible futures. All of it." Lily's enthusiasm was infectious. "Family businesses like yours represent something essential that's vanishing from the American landscape. But they don't have to vanish if we reimagine how they can exist in the modern economy." By closing time, preliminary filming arrangements had been made. As Margaret locked the bakery doors, she found herself looking at the familiar space with new eyes, not just as the burden she'd carried since Robert's death, but as something with continuing value in a changing world. Later that evening, the Henderson family gathered in Margaret's kitchen. The energy noticeably shifted from their previous crisis meetings. "Oliver's preservation design could work," Sarah admitted, surprising everyone with her openness. "The food hall concept would allow us to focus on our signature items while creating space for other local food entrepreneurs. And the online expansion could reach customers nationwide," James added. "Henderson's recipes without Henderson's overhead." "The historical documentation would be preserved in both the building and Lily's documentary," Michael noted. Margaret looked around at her children, feeling a weight lifting that she'd carried for longer than she cared to admit. "Your father would have loved seeing you all working together like this." The moment of unity felt fragile but precious, a family finding its way toward a future that honored its past without being imprisoned by it. None of them saw Daniel watching from his car across the street, his phone pressed to his ear as he made the call that would threaten everything. "Mr. Blackwell? It's about the Henderson property option. There's been a complication you should know about." The legal notice arrived on cream-colored letterhead from Blackwell Financial Services. Margaret stared at it across her kitchen table, the morning light making the formal language seem even more severe. "Acceleration clause has been activated, requiring payment in full of remaining mortgage balance, $342,650. 0, within 14 business days of this notice." How can they do this? Sarah's voice shook as she read over her mother's shoulder. "The payments have never been late." "There's a clause about property transfer negotiations," James said, scanning the document with practiced efficiency. "If the borrower enters into discussions to sell without notifying the lender, they can demand immediate repayment." Margaret's fingers trembled against the paper. "I never agreed to that." "It was added during the refinancing 3 years ago," James noted, flipping to the attached documents. "When you consolidated debt after Dad died." "Daniel handled those arrangements," Margaret whispered, the betrayal sinking in. "He said he was helping." The silence in the kitchen felt leaden until Michael voiced what everyone was thinking. "He set you up." Word spread through Millbrook with the speed only small towns can manage. By noon, a line stretched out the door of Henderson's bakery, customers buying twice their usual orders. Handwritten signs appeared in shop windows along Main Street. "Save Henderson's," and "Family Not Condos." Sarah worked the counter without pause, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced with calculations. Even with the surge in business, they couldn't generate enough revenue to cover the mortgage demand in 2 weeks. "We've sold out of everything," she told James during a rare quiet moment. "3 times what we normally do, and it's still just a drop in the bucket." James had been on his phone continuously, calling contacts from his Boston network. "I've got meetings with 2 local banks tomorrow, but without sufficient collateral." He left the sentence unfinished. Maya arrived with town council members in tow, offering to expedite permits for any solution the family developed. Lily Chen's camera crew captured the community response, the documentary taking shape around them in real time. "People care," Michael observed, watching the activity from behind the register. "That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Margaret replied softly. "But it won't pay off a mortgage." Eliza sat in the county records office, poring over property documents with focused intensity. Her environmental law background had given her skills in following paper trails, and Daniel Porter had left more traces than he realized. "Found anything?" Oliver asked, joining her with coffee. Their adversarial relationship had evolved into an uneasy alliance as the crisis escalated. "More than I expected," Eliza replied, spreading documents across the table. "Daniel didn't just facilitate the deal with you. He's been positioning himself for years." The records told a damning story. Daniel had become a silent partner in Blackwell Financial 3 years ago, just before Margaret's refinancing. He'd structured the loan with the acceleration clause, creating a trap he could spring whenever convenient. "He gets the commission from your purchase and a percentage of the loan repayment," Eliza concluded. "Plus, he's been underwater financially since his investment firm collapsed last year." Oliver's expression darkened. "Using family like that?" "This goes beyond business," Eliza agreed. "This is personal." The confrontation occurred at Margaret's home that evening. Daniel arrived uninvited, his manner suggesting he expected gratitude for offering a solution. "I've spoken with Blackwell," he announced to the assembled family. "They'll waive the immediate payment if you accept Reed's original offer." He glanced at Oliver, who sat silently in the corner. "The preservation plan is too complex, too many variables. The clean sale is the only viable option now." "The only viable option for whom?" James asked coldly. Daniel's practiced smile faltered momentarily. "For everyone. Margaret gets fair market value. The town gets development. I get a reasonable commission for my efforts." "And your ownership stake in Blackwell Financial?" Eliza placed the document she'd discovered on the coffee table. "How much do you stand to gain from forcing this sale?" The color drained from Daniel's face. "Where did you get those?" "Public Records Office," Eliza replied. "Not everything stays buried, Daniel." Margaret stood slowly, decades of contained emotion rising to the surface. "You used Robert's death. You used my grief and confusion to plant this financial time bomb." "Business is business, Margaret," Daniel attempted, his confident facade crumbling. Robert understood that. "Don't you dare speak for my father," Sarah said sharply. "Your father?" Daniel's composure snapped entirely. "Robert was my brother before he was your father. We built the initial business together, but he pushed me out when I needed capital for my own ventures." "You stole from him," Margaret corrected. "From us." "I borrowed," Daniel's voice rose, "with every intention of repaying once my investments matured. Robert could have waited, been patient. Instead, he cast me out like I meant nothing. His own brother." "He protected you," Margaret countered, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "He could have pressed charges, but he covered your theft to protect the family name, and held it over me for the rest of his life." Daniel's face contorted with decades of resentment. "Perfect Robert, the family saint, while I was the cautionary tale. He left me nothing in his will, not even an acknowledgement, after I begged him to reconcile before he died." "Michael, typically the quiet observer, stepped forward. "Dad kept every letter you sent him," he said, "including the ones threatening him if he didn't invest in your schemes. The ones where you blamed him for your failures." "You know nothing about it," Daniel snarled. "I know everything about it," Michael replied with unexpected authority. "I'm the family historian, remember? I've read every document, every letter. You weren't Robert's victim. You were his greatest regret." The room fell silent. Daniel looked suddenly older, the weight of his bitterness visible in the sagging of his shoulders. "It doesn't matter now," he said finally. "The acceleration clause is valid. You have 2 weeks to pay or the property goes to auction. Those are the facts." Margaret swayed slightly, her hand going to her chest. "I can't," she began, before her knees buckled. James caught her before she hit the floor. "Mom!" The emergency room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Margaret's pale face as she lay connected to monitors. The doctor had been reassuring but firm. "Not a heart attack, but a severe stress reaction. She needs rest and reduced anxiety immediately." The family gathered in the small waiting area, the crisis putting their priorities into stark relief. "I'm staying in Millbrook," James announced, his decision crystallizing in the sterile hospital air. "I've already drafted my resignation letter." Sarah looked up from her clasped hands. "What about your career?" "Some things matter more," he replied simply. "I can build a new career. We only have one family." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I was so angry at you for leaving, for having the courage to pursue what you wanted while I stayed behind." "It wasn't courage," James admitted. "It was escape. I was afraid I'd disappear into Dad's shadow if I stayed." "I was afraid I already had," Sarah whispered. "Sometimes I don't know where the bakery ends and I begin." Michael placed a hand on his sister's shoulder. "Maybe that's why this is happening. So we can all figure out who we are beyond the roles we've been playing." Eliza, who had been making calls in the corridor, rejoined them. "Oliver's here. He wants to talk to all of us." The developer entered cautiously, his usual confidence, tempered by genuine concern. "How is she?" "Stable," James replied, "but the doctor says the stress needs to stop." Oliver nodded, taking a seat. "I might have a solution. Not the original plan, not even the preservation compromise we discussed." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Something new, but it would require commitments from all of you, not just Margaret." As Margaret slept under hospital observation, her family listened to Oliver outline a third path, one that none of them had considered, but which might save everything if they were brave enough to embrace it. Margaret's dining room table had never held such detailed architectural drawings. Oliver Reed stood beside them, his polished presentation style replaced by a passionate intensity that transformed his features. "This is nothing like the original plan," he explained, tracing the outline of a reimagined Henderson property. "Instead of luxury units, we create a mixed-use development with the historic bakery as its heart." The Hendersons gathered around as Oliver unveiled his vision. A restored bakery building anchoring a thoughtfully designed complex with affordable apartments above small retail spaces. A public courtyard would connect the development to the harbor walkway, with historic markers, telling Millbrook's story. "The financial structure is different too," Oliver continued. "Reed Development becomes a partner rather than a buyer. We finance the construction and renovation, while Henderson's becomes a tenant with ownership equity." "How does this solve our immediate crisis?" James asked, the mortgage deadline looming over every conversation. "I can secure bridge financing to address the Blackwell situation," Oliver replied. "But this only works if the Henderson family commits to remaining involved, not just lending your name, but actively participating in the business going forward." The proposal hung in the air, complex in its implications. It wasn't just a business plan, but a life plan for each of them. "Why would you do this?" Sarah asked, suspicious of Oliver's motives. The original plan was more profitable for you. Oliver's confident demeanor faltered. Honestly? I need this project to succeed, and not just financially. He hesitated, before continuing. My last two developments focused solely on luxury markets. They made money but contributed nothing to the communities. My investors are happy, but... But what? Eliza prompted. But I want to build something that matters, Oliver admitted. Something my grandmother would have been proud of. His voice softened. She believed in me when I was that skinny kid with nothing. I want to prove her right. Margaret, still pale from her health scare but clear-eyed, studied the plans. This would require all of us to decide what we really want, she said quietly. No more drifting or hiding. James stood in his Boston office, boxing personal items while his colleagues watched with barely concealed curiosity. His resignation letter had been brief but definitive. After 12 years, he was leaving the firm to join a family business. Are you having some kind of midlife crisis? Asked Diane, his closest colleague. You were on track for partner next year. James carefully wrapped the award he'd received for last year's pharmaceutical merger. I spent my entire career helping other people optimize their businesses, he replied. Now I'm going to apply that to something that actually matters, to me. A bakery in a dying coastal town? Diane's skepticism was palpable. A family legacy, James corrected her. And a town that's not dying, just changing. Later, walking through Boston's financial district for what felt like the last time, James experienced not regret, but an unexpected lightness. The ambitious, young man who had fled Millbrook 15 years ago had been running from the fear of disappearing into his father's shadow. Now he was running toward something, a chance to build his own legacy alongside his family's. Sarah wandered through the kitchens of the New England Culinary Institute, watching students practice techniques she'd taught herself through years of trial and error. The admissions director had been encouraging about her application for the part-time advanced pastry program. Your professional experience counts significantly, the woman had explained. You could complete the certification in 18 months while maintaining your business. As Sarah observed a student creating an intricate sugar sculpture, she imagined bringing these refined techniques back to Henderson's, not replacing tradition, but evolving it. For the first time, she could envision a future where the bakery enhanced her dreams rather than delaying them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Found something in the walls. Come see. The bakery's renovations had begun with structural assessments, requiring the removal of sections of the original wainscoting. Michael stood in the partially deconstructed kitchen, carefully handling yellowed papers discovered within the walls. Original recipes, he told Sarah as she arrived. From Prohibition times, and look. He pointed to a faded photograph of their grandfather standing beside a young couple. I think that's Oliver's grandparents. The discoveries continued throughout the afternoon. Handwritten notes from their grandmother about adapting recipes during wartime rationing, a hidden compartment containing Prohibition-era ledgers recording liquor distribution alongside bread, sales, photographs of the bakery serving as a community gathering place during the Depression. It's not just our family's story, Michael realized. It's the town's story. Maya arrived with a town planner to discuss the regulatory aspects of Oliver's proposal, finding Michael surrounded by his historical treasures. This is perfect timing, she said, examining the artifacts. The Historical Commission is more likely to support the development if we can incorporate these elements into a public exhibition space. Margaret sat in her garden, Robert's journals, open beside her as she read his final entries. In his last weeks, unaware his heart was failing, he had written extensively about his hopes for the family's future. I worry we've become too attached to one version of the bakery's story. Buildings change, recipes evolve. What matters is that the family continues to create something meaningful together, whatever form that takes. Reading his words, Margaret felt a weight lifting, the burden of perfect preservation she'd carried since his death. Robert hadn't wanted a shrine, but a living legacy that could adapt and grow. Eliza found Oliver at the Model Center, meticulously revising financial projections for the new proposal. "The family's considering your offer seriously," she said. "But I need to understand something first." Oliver looked up from his calculations. "Go ahead." "The environmental modifications I suggested, stormwater management, sustainable materials, green space, you incorporated all of them. That adds significant cost." "It does," he acknowledged. "So why do it? Most developers fight those requirements." Oliver set down his pen. "Because you were right." His admission carried no defensiveness. "Those elements make the project better, more sustainable, more connected to the natural environment. It took someone challenging me to see that." Eliza nodded slowly. "My environmental work has always felt separate from my personal life, like I was fighting for abstract principles. And now? Now I see how environmental advocacy can shape something concrete, something that matters to people I care about." She smiled slightly. "It's a different kind of impact." As the 2-week deadline approached, the Henderson family gathered once more at Margaret's home. The tension of their earlier crisis meetings had transformed into something more purposeful, more reflective. "I've decided to stay in Millbrook," James announced, though this surprised no one after his resignation. "I want to reimagine the business model while honoring what makes Henderson special." Sarah spoke next. "I'm applying to culinary school, part-time. I want to bring new expertise back to our offerings while maintaining the classics. I'm working with the Historical Society to create a permanent exhibition about the bakery and Millbrook's waterfront history," Michael added. "The development will include a dedicated space for this." Margaret watched her children with quiet pride. "Robert would have loved seeing you all find your own ways to carry things forward." "What about you, Mom?" Sarah asked gently. "I'm ready to step back, not away," Margaret clarified. "To advise rather than manage daily operations. To have the retirement Robert wanted for me while still remaining connected." Eliza and Oliver exchanged glances, their formerly adversarial relationship evolving into cautious respect. "The revised plans will be ready tomorrow," Oliver said. "If you're all committed, we can move forward immediately." The family's shared determination felt like a fragile but precious new beginning. Their individual soul-searching had led them back to each other, but with clearer boundaries and more authentic commitments than before. None of them expected the certified letter that would arrive the following morning, an offer from National Harvest Bakeries to purchase the Henderson name, recipes, and brand for $3 million, with no interest in preserving the building or local operations. The corporate giant's unexpected intervention would force them to define exactly what they valued most about their legacy. The National Harvest Bakeries offer letter sat in the center of Margaret's dining room table, like an unexploded device. $3 million for the Henderson name, recipes, and brand identity. The building would be sold separately, the local operation closed, and the recipes mass-produced in facilities across the country. "It's more than twice what we'd make from Oliver's partnership initially," James said, his analytical mind automatically calculating implications despite his personal misgivings. "Plus, no ongoing business risk. We'd be set for life," Sarah added quietly, though her tone held no enthusiasm. "All of us." Michael studied the corporate letterhead with historians' skepticism. National Harvest has acquired 17 family bakeries in the past decade. None still operate in their original locations. "They're offering a solution to our immediate problem," Eliza observed neutrally. "The Blackwell deadline is just days away." Margaret remained silent, her fingers tracing the embossed company logo. The corporate offer represented everything she had wanted a month ago: financial security, freedom from daily operations, the end of her constant worry. Yet now, it felt hollow. "What do you think, Mom?" Sarah finally asked. Margaret looked up, her expression resolute. "I think we need to understand exactly what we'd be selling before we decide." Word of the National Harvest offer spread through Millbrook with remarkable speed. By afternoon, Margaret couldn't walk to the post office without being stopped by community members sharing their opinions. "You've earned a comfortable retirement," insisted Mr. Chambers, her longtime insurance agent. "No one would blame you for taking that money after all these years of service." Outside the pharmacy, opinions ran differently. "If those recipes go corporate, it won't be Henderson's anymore," Mrs. Abernathy argued. "Those chain bakeries all taste the same, like sweet cardboard." The divide wasn't strictly generational. Young parents who had grown up with Henderson's birthday cakes expressed dismay at losing the tradition for their children, while some older residents emphasized practical financial security over sentimental attachment. Maya found Margaret sitting on a harbor bench watching the afternoon fishing boats return. "The council's divided too," Maya said, joining her. "Some see the chain as providing stability, others worry about losing what makes Millbrook special." "What do you think?" Margaret asked. Maya considered carefully. "I think communities need anchors, places that connect the past and present, but I also think families need security." She paused. "Whatever you decide, there will be people who understand." In the bakery kitchen after hours, Sarah conducted a grim experiment. On one counter sat traditional Henderson recipes made with their usual premium ingredients. On another, the same recipes adapted using the commercial ingredients listed in National Harvest's production specifications. "Try this," she said as James entered, handing him 2 identical-looking lemon tarts. James bit into the first one, nodding appreciatively. "Classic Henderson's." Then he tasted the second and involuntarily winced. "What is that?" "That's what National Harvest would sell as authentic Henderson's lemon tart," Sarah replied. "Shelf-stabilized lemon flavoring, pre-made frozen crusts, preservatives for extended shelf life." James placed the half-eaten tart down with newfound determination. Dad would have hated this. "It's not just the taste," Sarah continued, warming to her argument. "It's the entire experience. The recipes were designed for small batches, for people who could adjust for the day's humidity, for hands that know when dough feels right." Her passion surged as she articulated what had been formless feeling. Mass production would strip everything that makes them special. Michael sat in the town archives, surrounded by file boxes containing Henderson's historical documents and photographs he'd been organizing. His phone displayed the National Harvest website, open to their Heritage Collection page featuring acquired brands. "Finding anything useful?" Eliza asked, joining him with coffee. "Look at these before and after pictures," Michael replied, showing her comparison photos of family bakeries purchased by National Harvest. The before images showed unique storefronts with distinctive character. The after images displayed identical branded facades with standardized signage. "They don't preserve what makes each bakery special, they homogenize everything." Eliza studied the evidence. "You see this in environmental contexts too. Developers who promise to maintain local ecosystems but install the same 5 landscaping plants everywhere." "Exactly. It's like..." Michael struggled for the analogy. "Biodiversity versus monoculture," Eliza offered. "One is resilient, complex, rooted in place. The other is efficient but vulnerable and interchangeable." Michael nodded, appreciating her framework. Henderson's isn't just recipes. It's this specific place, these specific people, this specific community tradition. He gestured to a photo of his grandfather serving returning soldiers after World War II. "National Harvest isn't buying our legacy, they're buying the appearance of it." Daniel Porter's arrival at the bakery was unexpected. He found Margaret, alone, preparing for the afternoon rush. "National Harvest is the answer to your problems," he said without preamble. "Clean exit, no complications, financial security." Margaret continued her work, kneading dough with practiced motions. "You said that about redevelopment originally." "This is different. No ongoing entanglements, no partnerships to manage." Daniel leaned closer. $3 million, Margaret. "You've earned this." Margaret's hands stilled. "Is there something you're not telling me, Daniel?" His hesitation was brief but noticeable. "National Harvest contacted me first. I may receive a finder's fee if the deal goes through." "Of course." "You would," Margaret said, unsurprised. "Always an angle." "Don't be naive," Daniel countered. "You want to hand the bakery to your children?" James was desperate to escape this town. Sarah's stunted her potential to maintain a struggling business. Michael lives in the past. His voice hardened. "Robert trapped all of you in his vision. Now you have a chance to break free." Margaret's expression shifted, something resolute, hardening in her features. "You never understood Robert, or any of us." She resumed kneading the dough. "Goodbye, Daniel." "You'll regret this sentimentality," he called as he left. "Some legacies aren't worth the cost." The family gathered in the bakery after closing. Oliver had been invited, a sign of how completely their relationship had transformed. The tension was palpable as they prepared to vote on National Harvest's offer. "I've calculated the financial implications of both options," James began, his business consultant training evident. "The corporate offer provides immediate financial security, but no ongoing growth. Oliver's partnership offers less upfront, but potentially more long-term value and control." "It's not just financial," Sarah added. "It's about quality and authenticity." She described her baking experiment, explaining how mass production would fundamentally change what made Henderson recipes special. Michael shared his research on National Harvest's pattern of acquiring and homogenizing family brands. "They're buying the appearance of authenticity without the substance." Margaret listened quietly, struck by how her children had grown into their convictions during this crisis. When everyone had spoken, she asked the question that had been hanging over them. "Are we ready to vote?" The unanimous decision surprised even them. A family that had begun this journey divided, but now found themselves united in their choice. National Harvest's offer would be declined. Oliver, who had remained respectfully silent during their deliberations, finally spoke. "I respect your decision, but it makes our financial challenge more immediate. Blackwell's deadline is still approaching." "We need to find alternative financing quickly," James acknowledged. "I might have an idea," Eliza suggested, her legal mind formulating a structure. "But it would depend on whether Millbrook truly values Hendersons as much as they claim." As they locked the bakery that night, Margaret felt a curious lightness despite the looming financial pressure. They had chosen the harder path, but for the first time since Robert's death, she felt they were making choices rather than simply reacting to circumstances. Outside, the spring evening was cool with promise, the harbor lights reflecting on water that had witnessed generations of Millbrook residents making difficult choices about what they valued most and what they were willing to sacrifice to preserve it. Henderson's heritage shares. Invest in Millbrook's future while preserving its past. The banner stretched across Main Street, directing interested residents to the town hall where Michael and Eliza had set up an information center. The concept, developed during late-night strategy sessions, offered community members the opportunity to purchase shares in the reimagined Henderson's Bakery, providing both the capital needed to address the Blackwell deadline and a stake in the business's future success. "It's an unconventional financing approach," James explained to the skeptical bank manager at Millbrook Savings and Loan, "but it combines traditional business lending with community investment." "Community investment is charity," the banker replied dismissively. "People donate for good feelings, not returns. Not in this case, James countered, presenting detailed projections. The business model is sound. Oliver's development creates built-in foot traffic. Our expanded online presence opens national markets. Heritage shareholders receive both dividend potential and preservation of a community landmark. As the banker reviewed the numbers, his professional skepticism began to soften. You're only asking us to finance 60%. The community investment would cover the rest? Plus, essential working capital for the transition, James confirmed. We believe Millbrook will literally put its money where its mouth is. The banker closed the folder. I'll present it to the loan committee, but I need proof of community buy-in first. Show me that Millbrook believes in this enough to invest, and the bank will consider doing the same. This was where Jack proposed to me, Mrs. Winslow told Michael, pointing to a corner table in the historical photographs he'd arranged in the town library's exhibition room. April 1962. He hid the ring in a cinnamon roll. Michael recorded her story, adding it to dozens he'd collected from residents. The exhibition, Henderson's Bakery, Millbrook's living room, had transformed from a historical display into a community storytelling project. Photographs, recipes, and artifacts from the bakery's history were accompanied by personal narratives from townspeople. The day my mother died, your father appeared at our door with bread still warm from the oven, recalled Mr. Peterson, Millbrook's retired postmaster. Said nothing, just handed it to me and squeezed my shoulder. That's when I knew we'd be okay somehow. As residents wandered through the exhibition, Michael noticed something unexpected: academic interest in his work. A professor from the State University's Oral History Department had visited twice, praising his methodology and suggesting collaboration on a broader project about small-town business institutions. You've done something remarkable here, the professor told him. This isn't just nostalgia. It's rigorous documentation of how businesses shape community identity. Michael adjusted his glasses, trying to hide his pleasure at the professional acknowledgement. It's their stories that matter. I'm just organizing them. Don't underestimate the importance of that, the professor replied. Stories without structure disappear. You're preserving something essential. In the bakery kitchen, Sarah arranged tasting plates with military precision. Her Heritage and Horizon event would showcase both traditional Henderson recipes and her new creations, innovations that respected their roots while introducing contemporary flavors. The lavender honey scone honors Grandma's original recipe, but adds fennel pollen for complexity, she explained to the assembled guests, a mix of longtime customers and food writers Lily Chen had invited. And this chocolate babka incorporates our traditional lamination technique with a tahini swirl for depth. Sarah moved through the crowd with newfound confidence, answering questions about techniques and ingredients with the authority of someone who had found her voice. Among the attendees was Chef Laurent from the New England Culinary Institute, invited specifically to evaluate her work. Your lamination is exceptional, he noted, examining a pastry's interior. Self-taught? Mostly, Sarah admitted. I studied books, videos, tried to reverse engineer techniques. Yet, you've developed your own approach. He nodded approvingly. You have an intuitive understanding many formally trained chefs lack. Your application to our program is promising. Sarah blinked, processing the implicit acceptance. I wasn't sure I could balance school and the bakery. The best education happens in both places, Chef Laurent replied. What you're creating here, tradition in conversation with innovation, that's what makes cuisine live and breathe. At the town council meeting, Maya navigated the complex politics of Oliver's revised development plan, with diplomatic skill born of lifelong community knowledge. The mixed-use approach addresses both housing needs and preservation concerns, she explained, directing council members through the proposal. The compromise balances financial viability with community character. What about the community? Investment model? Questioned Councilman Richards, the body's most conservative member. Sounds like a bailout disguised as investment. It's actually the opposite, Maya countered. It's the community putting skin in the game for what it claims to value, rather than expecting external rescue. She presented the legal framework Eliza had developed. The structure is sound, the returns realistic, and the community maintains influence over a central landmark. As the council voted to approve the necessary permits and zoning adjustments, Maya caught Oliver watching her with undisguised admiration. Their collaboration over the past weeks had transformed from professional necessity to mutual respect. "You're good at this," he told her after the meeting, seeing all sides, finding the path forward. "Millbrook's been my home my entire life," Maya replied. "I want what's best for it, which sometimes means helping it change the right way." On the evening of the fundraiser, Margaret stood in the bakery doorway, overwhelmed by the crowd filling the street outside. String lights crisscrossed overhead, tables displayed historical photographs and architectural renderings, and the air smelled of Henderson's signature pastries freely distributed to attendees. Eliza approached, clipboard in hand. "We've explained the investment structure to over 200 people. Now we see if they commit." The formal presentation began with James outlining the business case and Oliver explaining the development vision. Then, unexpectedly, townspeople began sharing their Henderson stories spontaneously, memories of milestone celebrations, daily rituals, moments of community connection centered around the bakery. "Henderson's made my wedding cake," said Mrs. Abernathy, "and my daughter's, and last year, my granddaughter's. When the hurricane hit in '91, they stayed open using generator power, making sandwiches for recovery workers," recalled the fire chief. "My first job was sweeping floors there after school," added the now retired bank president. "Robert Henderson taught me more about business ethics than Harvard Business School did later." As the testimonials continued, Margaret felt Eliza squeeze her hand. "They're not just telling stories," Eliza whispered. "They're making commitments." One by one, residents stepped forward to purchase heritage shares, from $25 each. Contributions from retirees on fixed incomes to substantial investments from local business owners. James's phone buzzed with a text from the bank manager. "Loan committee impressed by community response, moving forward with financing." The investment tracker, projected on the bakery wall, climbed steadily throughout the evening. When it surpassed their target, a cheer erupted that seemed to shake the old building's foundation. Margaret found herself surrounded by her children, each transformed by the journey of the past weeks. James had found purpose beyond corporate success. Sarah had discovered how her culinary artistry could both honor and reinvent tradition. Michael had given historical preservation a human face through storytelling. Even Eliza and Oliver had found unexpected paths, her environmental advocacy taking concrete form in community development, his business ambitions finding meaning beyond profit margins. "I never imagined this," Margaret admitted, watching neighbors celebrate not just the bakery's survival but its evolution. "All those years I spent trying to preserve Robert's legacy exactly as it was." "Maybe this is what Dad meant about legacy," Sarah suggested. "Not just preserving something static, but nurturing something living that can grow and change." As the evening wound down, Oliver approached with news that the legal paperwork with Blackwell Financial had been filed, the deadline met through their combined efforts. "We break ground on the development next month," he confirmed. "The bakery renovation comes first." The Hendersons gathered in the quiet kitchen after the crowd dispersed. The weight of imminent loss lifted from their shoulders. Through crisis, they had found not just a solution, but a reimagining of what Hendersons could become, a legacy that honored the past while embracing the future. None of them noticed Daniel watching from across the street, his expression unreadable as he observed the community's embrace of the family he had tried to manipulate. His presence suggested that while one chapter was closing, final reconciliations remained before the Henderson family's story could truly move forward. November brought crystalline skies to Millbrook, the harbor waters reflecting a deeper blue as the season turned. Thanksgiving week arrived with celebratory energy as temporary fencing around Henderson's bakery displayed renderings of the development to come. The Heritage and Horizon Project, as it had been officially named, had become a point of pride for the town, a symbol of how community and progress could coexist. The groundbreaking ceremony drew a crowd that spilled from the bakery's courtyard onto the surrounding streets. Residents gathered in their holiday best, thermoses of coffee and hot chocolate warming hands in the crisp autumn air. Local press mingled with regional news crews, drawn by the story's resonance in an era of vanishing family businesses. Margaret stood with her family at the center of it all, a ceremonial golden shovel in her hands. At 64, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that had replaced the strained composure of months earlier. Beside her, James and Sarah wore matching Henderson's aprons over their formal clothes, a visual statement of their dual identities as business professionals and bakers. Michael arranged the time capsule he'd prepared, while Eliza organized the ceremony proceedings with characteristic efficiency. "Welcome to a new chapter in Millbrook's story," Mayor Jenkins began, addressing the assembled crowd. "Today, we celebrate not just a building project, but a community's commitment to honoring its past while embracing its future." Oliver Reed stepped forward, his developer's polish now tempered with genuine connection to the project. "When we first proposed development on this site, we saw real estate potential. What we've discovered instead is the true meaning of community. Investment, not just financial but emotional and historical." The speeches continued as sun and shadow played across the familiar bakery facade. Maya speaking for the town council, James outlining the business vision, Sarah describing the culinary innovation plans. When Michael's turn came, he revealed the time capsule's contents, original recipes, community stories he'd collected, photographs spanning generations, and a letter from Margaret to future Henderson bakers. "To be opened 50 years from today," Michael explained, "when the town faces new changes we can't yet imagine." As the ceremony progressed, Margaret noticed a figure at the crowd's edge, Daniel, standing alone, watching with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Their eyes met briefly before the moment arrived for her to speak. "Henderson's Bakery has always been more than a building or a business," Margaret began, her voice steady. "It's been a keeper of traditions, a witness to life's celebrations and sorrows, a constant in a changing world." She paused, finding the words that had formed during months of reflection. "We've learned that preservation doesn't mean standing still. It means carrying forward what matters most, connection, quality, and care, while allowing new growth." With ceremonial flourish, Margaret turned the first shovelful of earth, officially beginning construction. As applause filled the air, she saw Daniel turn to leave. "Excuse me," she whispered to James, and made her way through the crowd. "Daniel," Margaret called, catching up to him at the harbor walkway. "I didn't expect to see you today." He turned, seeming older than his, 67 years. The polished veneer had faded, revealing someone more authentic but more vulnerable. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome." "That depends on why you're here." Daniel gazed out at the harbor before answering. "I've been thinking about Robert, about what he really valued." He gestured toward the ceremony. "Watching this, seeing what you've all created, I realize I never understood my brother, or what he built." "Robert wasn't perfect," Margaret said carefully. "But he believed in building something lasting, something that served more than self-interest." "I know that now." Daniel reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "I should have returned this years ago." Margaret opened it to find Robert's gold pocket watch, a family heirloom his grandfather had carried. "You took this?" When? The day after the funeral, Daniel admitted. I was angry, hurt that he left me nothing in his will after all our history. It was petty theft, driven by grief and resentment. His voice roughened. I've made poor choices, Margaret. Choices that cost me the only family I have left. The apology held no manipulation, no angle, just the raw honesty of someone facing the consequences of a life built on shifting foundations. Come to dinner tonight, Margaret said, surprising herself. We're having a private family meal in the bakery before construction fully begins. A last gathering in the space as we've known it. Are you sure the others would want me there? Forgiveness is also part of legacy, Margaret replied. Robert would have wanted that too, eventually. The bakery glowed with warmth that evening, tables arranged in the customer area now cleared of display cases. Margaret had prepared Thanksgiving dishes a day early: turkey, stuffing, cranberry relish, and Robert's favorite bourbon sweet potato casserole. Henderson's signature rolls filled bread baskets, and Sarah's pies lined the counter for dessert. Daniel entered cautiously, bearing a bottle of Robert's preferred scotch. The siblings greeted him with reserved politeness that gradually softened as the evening progressed. The restoration of trust would take time, but the first tentative steps had begun. As they settled around the table, each family member shared news of their evolving paths. James described his plans to expand Henderson's online presence while maintaining the bakery's artisanal standards. Sarah proudly announced her admission to the Culinary Institute's executive program. Classes start in January, she explained. I'll balance studies with developing our new menu offerings. The director is excited about documenting traditional baking methods alongside innovation. Michael revealed that his exhibition had attracted a book deal. A photographic history of Millbrook centered around Henderson's as a community institution. The university press wants to publish it next fall, he said, still seeming slightly dazed by the opportunity. When conversation turned to Margaret's plans, she smiled with newfound serenity. Semi-retirement. I'll consult on recipes and traditions, but leave daily operations to you three. It's time to enjoy the legacy rather than just maintaining it. And I have some news as well, Eliza said, glancing at James with quiet joy. We're expecting a baby in May. The next generation of Hendersons will be here for the grand reopening. The announcement brought tears to Margaret's eyes, the perfect completion of the circle that had begun with crisis and now turned toward renewal. As dessert concluded, Oliver arrived with Maya for the ceremonial toast they'd planned. The group moved through the bakery, champagne glasses in hand, visiting each familiar corner one last time. The kitchen where generations had baked before dawn, the office where Robert had kept meticulous records, the front counter where countless community exchanges had occurred. Tomorrow the renovation begins, Oliver explained. The structure stays, but everything inside will be refreshed while honoring the original design. They gathered finally in the center of the main room, forming a circle as Margaret raised her glass. To the last holiday with the old Henderson's bakery, she began, echoing the words that had started their journey at Easter. And the first holiday with the new Henderson legacy, Eliza completed, her hand resting gently on her stomach. As their glasses clinked in the warm light, Margaret felt Robert's presence, not as a ghost demanding preservation, but as a foundation upon which new stories could be built. Through crisis and conflict, the family had discovered what truly constituted their legacy. Not just a name, not just a place, but the values and connections that would endure through whatever changes came. Next, outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting Millbrook's rooftops and harbor with the promise of renewal that had always followed each ending in the town's long history. The Henderson story continued, evolving yet constant, like bread rising with ancient traditions and new hands shaping its future. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.